You're welcome to our 20th lesson in science, and I hope you're doing well. Alright, for special announcements, check the scoreboard based on the date you posted your work to verify your scores of previous assignments. So let's take note of that. There's a change now. You have to enter the date you posted your work in order to see or verify the score of that assignment. What have we today? Today, we would like to touch on an important aspect of life cycle of flowering plants. Of course, we are still on the stages of the life cycle of flowering plants. In our previous studies or lesson, we touched on flowering as a stage of flowering plants. Then we'll move on to look at pollination. Our next stage after pollination will be fertilization. Now, before we touch on fertilization, it is important to identify the functions of the part of an insect-pollinated flower. Fully grasping the functions of the part will help you understand the concept of fertilization and other stages later. And so by the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify the functions of parts of an insect-pollinated flower. Now, before we start, by way of revision, can you identify some parts of the flower we drew in our previous lesson, lesson 18 to be specific? Good. We mentioned the male reproductive part known as the stamen, the female reproductive part known as pistil or carpel. Then we identified other parts like the petals, the sepals, and of course the flower stalk or the pedicel, the receptacle. Alright, so this is the picture we identified in the previous lesson. We would like to look at the functions of the part of this flower. But before we start, I have a question for you. What really is the importance of insect-pollinated flower or flowers in general? What is the importance of flowers in general? Some will say it is used to decorate the environment. This answer is not correct because we are looking at the importance of the flower to the plant, not to humans. So let's take note of that difference. So we're saying that the main purpose of flower is sexual reproduction, which helps the survival of the species. So let's take note of that. The main purpose of flower is sexual reproduction, which helps the survival of the species. Or flower is the main sexual reproductive organ of the flower that ensures survival of plant species. Flower is the main sexual reproductive organ of a plant that ensures the survival of plant species. And now let's look at the functions of the main parts of the flower. Let's start with petals. What will be the function of the petals or the importance of the petals? Alright, petals, whose collective name is corolla, are brightly colored parts that attracts insects for pollination. Let's take note of this fact. Now let's move on to sepals. Sepals. Sepals, whose collective name is calyx or calyx, are green-like structures that protect the flower at its bud or young stage. So let's take note of that. So when the flower is young, it is the sepal that protects the inner part of the petals, flower, when it is young. Stamen is the male reproductive part that produces pollen grains containing the male sex cells or gametes. It's the male reproductive part that produces pollen grains containing the male sex cells or gametes. Now look at the picture carefully. From here, this is the stamen. But remember, the stamen has two main parts. We have the anther, the topmost part, containing the pollen grains, and then the filaments, which support the stamen. Let's look at the female reproductive parts. Pistil. Pistil, also known as carpel, is the female reproductive part that receives pollen grains. So when the pollen grains are transferred from the anther, they settle on the pistil. And the pistil has about four main parts. We have the stigma that receives the pollen grains. We have the style that supports the stigma. We have the ovary that protects the ovule. Now the ovule contains the female sex cell, which will later fuse with the male sex cells. And this will be discussed in detail under fertilization come Thursday, God willing. Let's move on to receptacle. This ball-like structure here is not there for fun. It has several functions, but the main function is that it supports the flower. So it's bearing all the weight of the flower. Because it's bearing the weight of the flower, it has to be big, large enough in order to cushion or bear the weight of the upper part of the flower. Then we have what we call pedicel, also known as flower stalk. The main function is that it attaches the flower to the body of the plant. My dear learners, this is what time we have as today's lesson is short though, but it is prerequisite or it is required to help us understand the next stage of flowering plants called fertilization. So on this note, let's move on to the assignments. Now the assignment is more of a practical test. So study the diagram carefully and answer the questions that follow. Please do not draw the flower. Just answer the questions by using letter A, B, C, and D. A. Identify the name of the organ illustrated above. Please, I want the full name of the organ. B. State the importance of the above organ. C. Name the part labeled I, II, IV, and V in the diagram above. And finally, state one function of I, and IV. I wish you the best of luck. Do the work in time, post it, and I'll mark it, and you receive the result before God willing Thursday. Alright, thanks. We'll meet again. Bye-bye.